Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 581, A Huge Beast Attacks. Although Han Li and Mai Ning were new arrivals, the guards merely glanced at them without asking any questions. Instead, they surrounded the returnees and excitedly asked them a few questions. As a result, the large men gave them a glance at the fish and prawn in their bags before the guards cried out in surprise. Han Li furrowed his brows at the sight. It seemed that food was a scarce resource here. Soon after, Han Li swept his eyes across the entire village. The entire village was within the protection of the tall stone walls, and all of its buildings were crudely carved cubes made from the same pitch-black stone as the walls. There was also a small stone platform built at the center of the village that was several times taller than the other buildings. Additionally, the top of the platform seemed to emit a faint purple fog that permeated through the entire village. It seemed to completely absorb any of the blue lightning that happened to strike the village. The purple fog was undoubtedly some kind of spell formation, but Han Li was unable to perceive the slightest spiritual qi inside the stone walls. Instead, he only felt a cold yin energy lingering in the air. Although his spiritual sense was still trapped within his body, he could still keenly sense spiritual qi. Han Li was bewildered as to why this was the case. The lean man's group had entered the village and already arrived at a large hall near the platform. There were a group of people outside the hall that were gesturing and whispering with the lean man's group when one of them looked in Han Li's direction with a deep gaze. Han Li felt his heart tremble. That person possessed the deepest inner strength of anyone he had encountered in this land. Were it in the outside world, Han Li could have easily killed him with a twirl of his finger and ignored him. But as Han Li was now, he would have to strive his hardest to deal with him. At that moment, the lean man had approached the group of people and said something to them before turning around and pointing at Han Li and Mai Ning. The group then turned their gazes to Han Li. Han Li remained silent and revealed no fear, but to his side, Mai Ning revealed nervousness from not knowing what they had in mind for them. The lean man beckoned to the two and said, "You two, come over. The village elders have some questions for you." Han Li nodded his head and calmly walked over with Mai Ning in tow. The group of people that had been standing outside had already turned around and entered the hall, and Han Li soon followed. A plump old man that sat at the center of the hall gazed at them with a kind expression and said, "Please, sit. Since we are all human, we will naturally do our best to aid one another. However, there is much that is different in this world from the outside. How about you two first introduce yourselves before I start introducing you to this land?" The others sat down at his side, and the one who had glared at Han Li outside the hall were among them as well. He had narrow eyes, a hostile expression and pale skin. At that moment, his spirited eyes had swept across Han Li and the beautiful Mai Ning behind him. Although he was silent, a peculiar expression flickered through his eyes. Han Li casually smiled and calmly replied, "There isn't much to say about us. We encountered the ghost mist at sea and were drawn here by it. As for my previous identity, what use is it here? There is no point in talking about it." The old man smiled upon hearing Han Li's vague answer. He examined the two with narrowed eyes before saying, "You two must be cultivators, so there is no point in concealing this." With that said, the old man's gaze dropped down to the bulging storage pouch at Han Li's waist. Han Li's expression remained unchanged, but he was inwardly shocked. As for Mai Ning, her expression grew pale with worry. "You two don't need to be scared. Although there aren't many cultivators among us, we are far more happy to have you join this village than we would be with ordinary people. However, you two will be incapable of using magic or spiritual power in the Umbra realm. The only powers you'll be able to use are a few crude martial arts and Umbra energy." "Umbra energy?" Han Li asked with a bewildered expression. The old man twirled his beard and slowly said, "That's right. It is somewhat similar to magic power, but it cannot be used to cast magic techniques. However, cultivators are able to use the inner cores of Umbra beasts to deploy a few small-scale spell formations. We have much use for them in our village. And even if you aren't proficient in spell formations, cultivators' bodies are far stronger than those of ordinary men. They will certainly be great helpers. After a moment of thought, Han Li asked, "Your esteemed self seems to understand much about us cultivators. Are there other cultivators in the village?" The plump old man smirked and said, "Of course there are, but they only number about 6. This old man happens to be one of them. When I was sucked into the ghost mist, I was only a foundation establishment cultivator." A trace of astonishment flickered through Han Li's eyes, but when he thought to ask more questions, the entire hall violently rumbled. In the distance, there seemed to be a huge monster charging at the village. The expressions of the people inside the hall had greatly changed, and they no longer paid any attention to Han Li. They all immediately walked out, and Han Li soon followed after them with a hesitant expression. The village elders were commanding several hundred robust youths to all rush up the thick walls with pikes in most of their hands, while a few of them carried crude bows. Although their expressions were all tense, they acted with perfect discipline as if they had already experienced this many times. Han Li's gaze turned in the direction of a very loud rumble coming from outside the stone wall. Although he could feel the tremors grow even more astonishing, nothing else had yet to happen. Han Li rubbed his chin and expectantly glanced around for a moment. He then walked over to a tall building nearby and took advantage of the chaos to jump off a wall and easily climbed onto the stone building's roof. From the top of the building, Han Li was able to see what was happening. In the distance, he saw that the stone and sand were violently scraping through the air on a bewildering black wind while a black frost spread across the ground in its wake. It appeared amazingly cold. This seemed to be the yin wind that the lean man had spoken of previously. It truly wasn't something that ordinary mortals could handle. However, as the yin wind reached about 300 meters from the village, it began to disappear, accompanied by heavy tremors as a large object dropped onto the ground. Although it was still a good distance away, an astonishing aura could be felt from it. Soon, a 40-meter-tall black figure emerged from the winds. When Han Li saw the black figure's true appearance, he felt his blood turn cold. At first glance, the black figure appeared to be a gigantic gray ape, except that the beast had 4 eyes and a pair of wings emerging between its ribs. It carried a log of jet black wood in one arm as it madly charged towards the village, while its 4 eyes were radiating with crimson light and emitted a powerful, bloodthirsty aura. After the beast's true form was revealed, many people started to loudly shout, "It's an insidious mauler. Quickly, send over the great shields." In an instant, a large number of women, children, and elderly began to deliver shields of all kinds to the walls. But soon after, they began to flusteredly run away from the walls as the huge beast came within 300 meters of the village. The tremors caused by the beast's footsteps had left Han Li bewildered. It appeared as if the stone walls would be taken down by the tremors long before the beast even reached them. But in the next moment, huge tentacles were formed from several strands of dense violet fog and rigidly fastened onto the huge beast's feet. As a result, the huge beast lost its footing and fell in front of the stone wall, causing everyone in the garrison to lose their balance for a moment from the resulting tremors. Han Li unconsciously turned his gaze to the tall platform with astonishment, and shockingly discovered that there were now 4 people sitting cross-legged on the platform. Their bodies were covered in a faint layer of purple chi as if they were utilizing a technique. This is Umbra energy. Han Li's heart stirred. In the following instant, an order was shouted, "Attack!" A large number of pikes and arrows were shot at the huge beast like rain, completely enveloping it. As Han Li watched this, his heart thumped with excitement. Knowing that things were far from good, the huge beast loudly roared and released an icy yin wind from its mouth. Not only were the incoming arrows all blown away by the yin winds, but they were even covered in a layer of glossy black ice. They had all fallen to the ground without even touching the beast. As for the heavier pikes, although they managed to fall onto the huge beast's body, the yin wind had greatly reduced their power, and they were barely able to cause a few superficial wounds. All they had managed to achieve was to further enrage the huge beast. In its fury, the beast's eyes began to flicker with crimson light. With a bang, its neck fur began to harden and grow erect, making for a sinister appearance. When Han Li saw this, his mind grew blank. The huge beast lowered its head and the erect hair instantly transformed into countless black streaks that shot at the stone wall. The wall's garrison seemed to already know that this would happen. Although their faces appeared nervous, they shouted a rallying cry as they raised their shields to meet the attack. Sharp cracks sounded out as the black streaks struck the shields. Although the black streaks managed to deeply pierce into the shields, a majority of them managed to successfully block the attack. As for the few garrison members that were struck, they were immediately thrown off the wall by the force of the strike. It was unknown whether or not they had survived. The remaining garrison were too busy to look after the injured. Instead, another order to attack was shouted, and a rain of pikes and arrows immediately followed. But just like the previous time, the huge beast managed to knock most of the projectiles away with the yin winds. However, it seemed the beast was only able to harden the hair on its neck, so although it continued to loudly shout in response to the attacks, it was only able to crawl forward as it struggled. It no longer had any methods to attack back. As for the tentacles formed from the purple mist, they continued to hold its legs firmly in place without a single moment of weakness. As the attacks continued for another 6 waves, the huge beast seemed to have eventually exhausted its yin wind and couldn't continue its resistance. From that moment, the arrows and pikes struck with increasingly greater frequency, piercing into the huge beast's body. As this continued, the beast sustained minor injuries and its furious roars grew more spirited as it continuously pounded the huge black log into the ground, filling it with holes. As Han Li witnessed the beast's immense strength and durability, he unconsciously became somewhat fearful of it. As if it were planned in advance, a squad of particularly burly and vigorous men quickly rushed onto the stone walls. Apart from the several 12-meter-long pikes they held in their arms, they carried nothing else. These people each began to lift the pikes in a practiced motion as soon as they arrived on the walls and fiercely launched them in the huge beast's direction. These powerful shots tore through the air, leaving Han Li surprised by the wind they produced. Each of these men had to possess powerful inner strength to be able to toss the pikes with such ease, while having each pike sail through the skies with immense speed and power. In the following instant, bowl-sized splatters of blood began to appear all over the beast's body. All of the strikes were to great effect, nailing the beast to the ground. The beast's original ferocity had completely disappeared without a trace. Huge cheers erupted from the walls with everyone wearing a face of relief. The purple coils of smoke then disappeared without a trace. A group of people then excitedly rushed towards the wooden gate with blades in their hands, intending on finishing off the beast. As for the others, they had already started to tend to the wounded. But before the wooden gate fully opened, the crestfallen beast suddenly roared with a final burst of strength and waved its arm, thrusting the huge 30-meter-long log into the sky. It carried an astonishing pressure as it directly flew in the direction of the village. Seeing that the huge beast was on the verge of dying, a few of the villagers had happily rushed out. However, they cried out in shock as they saw the log flying in their direction. But in the following instant, a silhouette had blurred before them and directly shot towards the huge log in the air. With a roar, the person fiercely struck at the center of the log with both his arms. With a loud crack, the black log flew off in another direction, falling in an area without people. This person then lightly landed on the ground in a relaxed and confident manner. He was the middle-aged man from earlier with a harsh expression and pale face. The villagers that had been saved greatly sighed in relief and immediately spoke to their savior, repeatedly thanking him. However, the pale man merely waved at them with an indifferent expression before returning back to his original position. A trace of astonishment then flickered within Han Li's eyes. After the pale man had rescued these people, he had carelessly shot a cold glance in his direction. Although Han Li didn't know what he meant by it, it clearly wasn't positive by any means. Han Li frowned, and just as he pondered what the man had meant by it, the wooden gate opened and several tens of robust men charged out of the village to finish off the huge beast. However, it didn't end after the beast was dead. With their long blades, they cleaved open the beast's skull and fumbled around within the blood and gore until they took out green, thumb-sized gem. The group cheered after they found it, and those that were watching cheered along with them. Han Li blinked, suddenly feeling that the green gem seemed somewhat familiar. After lowering his head for a moment of thought, he suddenly recalled what it was. During his trip to Heaven Void Hall, he had encountered many similar green gems in the wreckage of the puppets. Could they be the same material? After watching for just a moment more, Han Li wordlessly leapt off the stone building. The plump old man and the other elders had already returned to the hall, and Han Li still had a bellyful of questions he wanted to ask them. When Mai Ning saw Han Li returning to the hall, she followed him in with a lowered head. After witnessing the previous battle, she realized the dangers of this place and became worried. When Han Li entered the hall, the elders had already returned to their seats. When the plump old man saw Han Li enter, he smiled and thought to say something when a tall, robust man quickly entered with the green gem in his hand. The robust man placed the gem on the table in front of the elders and respectfully said, "Great elders, this is the insidious Morlus Umbra beast gem. Please take a look at it." The old man glanced at the gem and happily said, "We've put you all through quite a bit of trouble. Before this, we sent you all out to take advantage of the eruption of spirit extinguishing chi, and you succeeded in bringing back fish. In a moment, we will bestow you all with great rewards. Many thanks, elders." The robust man wore an expression of delighted surprise and withdrew from the hall with an expression of satisfaction. Han Li stood to the side and watched all this with a detached expression. The strange beast that you two witnessed was an Umbra beast known as the insidious Mauler. It must have been quite a shock to you too. Although the Umbra realm spans only about 100 kilometers, there are demon beasts, humans, and all sorts of Umbra beasts within. With slight astonishment, Han Li asked, "There are demon beasts here?" The old man bitterly smiled and paused for a moment before answering, "Of course. Whenever there's a tear in space, both cultivators and demon beasts are brought here all the same. The demon beasts here aren't able to use their demon arts, but they've all developed their bodies with great effort and have incredible power. They aren't an existence that humans or Umbra beasts can provoke. Fortunately, they only guard a few specific areas and feast on Umbra beasts. They don't pose much of a threat to us humans since they are unlikely to emerge. Umbra beasts, however, are different. They are born from the Umbra chi of this place and are innately fond of devouring human flesh. Every so often, powerful Umbra beasts will come knocking at human villages. Although a majority of villages are capable of repelling them, smaller villages are occasionally defeated and completely wiped out. Conversely, the Umbra beasts are endless and another insidious Mauler will condense and re-emerge into the Umbra realm soon enough." After a moment of silence, Han Li slowly asked, "From what you've said, it seems that this isn't the only human village. There are others." "Of course. Although there aren't many, there's about 8 other villages scattered throughout the Umbra realm. Food is scarce here, so apart from a few pieces of fertile land, the rest is barren from the heavy Umbra chi. A majority of the Umbra beasts possess poisonous flesh, and apart from some special varieties, we are incapable of consuming them. Although demon beasts are able to consume them, humans would perish upon eating them. As such, only useful people are allowed to live in villages. Anybody who is useless will be driven away and have their lives run their natural course." The old man's last words were spoken with an icy tone. Han Li frowned and let out a long breath before asking, "Your esteemed self called this place the Umbra realm. Does this place have any relation with the netherworld from legend? Is there any way to restore the magic power that was restricted? Most importantly, I wish to return to the outside. I have no intention of staying here. Would your esteemed self happen to know of a way out?" The plump old man shook his head and sighed. "A majority of the humans in this world were born here, and most of humans that are brought here by the ghost mist end up devoured by Umbra beasts. Only a small minority were lucky enough to reach a village. As for my own close friends and family, they are all on the outside. If it was so easy to return, why would us survivors from the outside world remain here and continue living day after day on the verge of crisis? As for whether or not this place has anything to do with the netherworld, who could possibly know? However, there is a senior that has stayed here far longer than I have, and he holds the belief that this area is a crevice between the human world and the netherworld. As a result, there is a dense concentration of Umbra chi, but there are no excessively powerful Umbra beasts that take form. Additionally, there is a far-fetched rumor being spread around by a few cultivators that believe this world has nothing to do with the netherworld. These cultivators believe that this world is actually the stomach of a legendary devil beast, the Rahu. Legend says that the Rahu is capable of both devouring stars and tearing through space, and that it is fond of concealing itself on the seafloor, only emerging to feed itself every so often. That is supposed to explain how the strange mist emerges from the sea and can link the two worlds together. Han Li's expression greatly changed when he heard this. The Rahu? How could that be possible? It makes far less sense than the netherworld. I don't believe that this entire world is contained inside a devil beast. The old man leisurely said, "That's right. When I first heard of this, I was shocked as well. Although it is hard to swallow, there is still a possibility it's true. If the tiers in space appeared periodically, then one might expect that they all appear at the same place. However, this isn't the case. Whenever new arrivals are sucked into the Umbra realm, they all come from different areas in the seas that others haven't heard of. For example, I came from a small island in the South Bay province of the Great Court of Jin. As for the other cultivators, they've arrived from places such as the Five Dragon Seas, the Heavenly Sand Continent, and the Scattered Star Seas as well. Nobody recognizes where anybody else has come from, but here we are all the same." The Great Court of Jin? You're a cultivator of the state of Jin. A trace of astonishment flickered within Han Li's eyes. When he was in the Heavenly South region, he had heard much of the esteemed state of Jin. The old man's eyes brightened. "Could it be that you also came from the Great Court of Jin?" Han Li shook his head and said, "No, but I have heard quite a bit about it. I know it to be an immensely large country, and I had always wanted to visit it but never had the opportunity." The old man revealed a trace of disappointment and said, "So it's like that. That is somewhat regretful. This old man truly wishes for an opportunity to return." The old man then radiantly smiled and chuckled. Fellow Daoist would have known what a true world of cultivation was had he visited our great Jin. To the best of my knowledge, there is no other cultivator world that compares in scope or activity of ours. It wouldn't be a lie to say that the great state of Jin is a sacred site for cultivators. Han Li rubbed his nose, but despite the bitter smile on his face, his heart stirred in response to the old man's words. The old man smiled and chuckled. This old man has strayed off topic. As for your previous question about whether or not there's a method of restoring one's magic power, I can only tell you should abandon your hopes while you remain in the Umbra realm. In addition to Umbra Chi, there's also spirit extinguishing Chi in the air as well. It is periodically released from the depths by eruptions, spreading it throughout the sky. So long as cultivators are within its range, their magic power and abilities are completely sealed. It is quite fortunate that you were brought over here during an eruption of spirit extinguishing Chi. Han Li suddenly felt gloomy upon hearing all of this. Were it not for the eruption of spirit extinguishing Chi, he wouldn't have even been brought here by some trifling ghost mist. After a moment of silence, Han Li resentfully said, "Since we were able to enter, then there must be a way of leaving. I refuse to believe that there isn't." The old man twirled his beard and unhurriedly said, "Well, technically there is a way out, but it requires assistance." A trace of joy appeared in Han Li's mind and he hastily asked, "What is it?" As Mai Ning heard this, her expression fluctuated with roused spirits. "It's..." The old man revealed a hesitant expression. Han Li's expression stirred and an odd emotion flickered within his eyes. "What? Could it be inconvenient for you to say?" The old man grimaced as he looked at the two. His eyes then narrowed and he said with a deep tone, "Please don't misunderstand. There is no point in concealing it. Although I do want 2 more cultivators to join the village, I'm not making it deliberately difficult for you. I am merely afraid you 2 fellow Taoists will impatiently rush out and throw your lives away." After Han Li heard this, he immediately chuckled, but his smile soon disappeared as he solemnly said, "Be at ease. Although I appear young, I've cultivated for many years and am disinclined to make any rash actions. If it truly is impossible, I won't pointlessly risk my life. However, I would still like to hear of the method." After some consideration, the plump old man replied, "Since that is the case, this old man won't conceal it any longer." He then walked to the hall's entrance and raised his head to the sky with a pensive expression. "Oi." Mai Ning bit her red lips and asked, "Brother Han, what do we do? Could it be that you truly wish to climb Stormwind Mountain?" Her current complexion was extremely pale. After she heard the method to return, she began to despair, believing that it was impossible to achieve. Han Li gazed at the sky and indifferently said, "I haven't given it much thought yet, but I do know that I will be giving it a try eventually." When Mai Ning heard this, her expression stirred. Just as she thought to say something, someone suddenly approached them. It was a 16-year-old, dark-skinned youth with a curious expression. The youth stared at them and elegantly said, "So you are the two new arrivals. I've received orders from the elders to bring you two to your residences. Since you have just arrived, 3 days of food will be given to you free of charge. However, later you will have to undertake assignments or else you will be ejected from the village." Han Li nonchalantly said, "That's fine. Lead the way." The youth nodded his head and set off without another word. Shortly after, the youth brought the two of them to a neat stone building in a corner of the village. When Mai Ning arrived in the room and saw that there was only one wide bed, her face suddenly grew scarlet. The woman hesitantly asked the youth, "There is only one bed here?" The youth blinked and curiously asked, "If a man and a woman are together, then wouldn't they want to sleep in one bed?" Having heard that, Mai Ning's blush grew more intense. She thought to give an explanation, but she was unable to muster any words for the time being. At that moment, Han Li had finished examining the building's exterior and indifferently said, "We will be sleeping separately. Please bring us another bed." The youth curled his lips. Although he was somewhat unwilling, he agreed and walked out. After the youth walked out, Han Li promptly said, "Go ahead and take a rest first. I'm going to take a look around the village." When Mai Ning heard him, she wore a blank expression and silently nodded. Without any further hesitation, Han Li walked out of the building and glanced around before heading towards the center platform. He was greatly interested in the methods to control Umbra energy. There was no one standing guard nearby the stone platform, so Han Li was able to easily approach it. With its great height, the lack of stairs made it appear even more towering than he had expected. Han Li walked several times around the stone platform and easily climbed onto it. Han Li walked around on the platform and curiously examined a stone disc with a trace of astonishment. The disc was over 3 meters wide and was placed flat onto the platform. There were many strange decorative patterns carved into it along with many profound talisman characters. Although there was no one currently operating it, it continuously emitted a purple mist that spiraled into the sky and covered the village. As a proficient scholar of the Tao of formation spells, Han Li began to study the stone disc with narrowed eyes. Not longer after, his expression fluttered before revealing a trace of enlightenment. He then furrowed his brow as he sunk deep into thought. While Han Li was completely entranced, he suddenly heard an unfamiliar voice from behind him. Could it be that fellow Daoist has obtained some profound insights? Han Li's heart was shaken and he inwardly cursed in surprise upon realizing that someone had unknowingly appeared behind him. It would have been quite dangerous if they had meant him any harm. However, it wasn't entirely Han Li's fault for his carelessness, as he was accustomed to having his spiritual sense surround his body. He was still slowly adapting to the loss of his magic power and spiritual sense. Han Li grew inwardly vigilant and wordlessly turned around. A white-haired old man with long hair stood before Han Li. His face was full of wrinkles, but his eyes exuded a strong spirit, and he was currently looking at Han Li with a wide smile. Han Li hesitantly asked, "Are you a cultivator?" He could no longer tell due to the loss of his spiritual sense. The old man smiled and replied, "I am Bao Huanzi, an old cultivator from the 5 Dragon Seas. You must be one of the 2 newly arrived cultivators." The 5 Dragon Seas. Han Li's mind stirred with interest upon hearing the name. Han Li's expression relaxed and he said, "So it turned out to be fellow Daoist Bao. My surname is Han and I am a vagrant cultivator of the Scattered Star Seas." The Scattered Star Seas? There was previously a fellow Daoist that originated from the Scattered Star Seas, but unfortunately, he perished during a mission after encountering a fearsome Umbra beast. Regardless, there are truly too few fellow Taoists proficient in the Tao of talismans. From how deeply engrossed you were while looking at the stone talisman, you must hold quite some skill in the area. The old man sighed and quickly changed the subject. Stone talisman? Are you talking about the disc? Han Li wore a baffled expression. This was the first time he had heard of such a thing. The long-haired old man narrowed his eyes as he proudly said, "He." It's no surprise that you wouldn't know of such things, as I reckon that stone and jade talismans have all but vanished in the other lands. Only a few sects in our 5 dragon seas are still able to refine these ancient talismans. When Han Li heard this, his baffled expression disappeared and replaced with a frown. He glanced at the old man and said, "I've truly never heard of stone or jade talismans ever being created in this world. I've spent quite some time studying the Tao of talismans, and the talisman characters on the stone disc leave me filled with amazement. Your explanation has dispelled some of my confusion, but is it mistaken on my part that I've perceived spell formation characteristics in these talismans?" The old man revealed a trace of shock before rubbing his hands together and wearing a wide smile. "I truly didn't expect that fellow Daoist was proficient in both talismans and formation spells. You've earned my respect." Fellow Daoist Han isn't mistaken. This purple cloud stone talisman is quite a bit different from true stone talismans. In order to utilize Umbra energy, it was altered with a few spell formation characteristics, effectively turning it into both a talisman and a spell formation. But as a result of this modification, its power has also greatly decreased. Han Li nodded his head with a pensive expression and took another glance at the stone disc. A trace of confusion flickered from Han Li's eyes. "From what you've said, you are able to use Umbra energy to perform magic techniques by using Umbra beast gems and spell formations. However, I don't see any beast gems embedded in the disc. Could there be something else that is peculiar about the stone talisman? It seems there is still much that fellow Daoist doesn't know. Surely you've seen the insidious mauler from today. Although a majority of people in the village cultivate martial arts and have gained fleshly might beyond that of ordinary people, it isn't possible for a lone person to challenge great Umbra beasts with martial arts alone. Even if they were able to defeat one with superior numbers, there would be many casualties and would be an unsustainable tactic. As such, we've used Umbra energy to disable the enemy with a few magic techniques during the village's time of need. However, this also consumes the village's stockpile of gems, so it must first be considered whether or not the village would be able to persist without them." The old man smiled and paused for a moment before continuing. "Regardless, these beast gems are incredibly difficult to acquire. Generally, the larger the demon beast, the more likely there's a beast gem inside their skull, but that isn't a guarantee. There were several times where we invested great amounts of effort and resources to slay a huge demon beast, but no beast gems were found on its corpse. As for the villagers that slayed a few of the fire-scale beasts on their way back, they were actually able to find a beast gem among them, but this tends to be an exception. In summary, the demand for beast gems is astonishingly high due to the constant assaults by the Umbra beasts. However, we've only managed to maintain a stockpile of about 10 Umbra beast gems over the years, so we only use them with reluctance. As a result, the beast gems are kept among the village elders, and are only to be used when required. After the battle is concluded, they are immediately returned. As for the stone talismans, they are instilled with several days' worth of power, and the talisman is left to persist for several days. The beast gems aren't allowed to be embedded in them, wasting the slots that were specifically refined for them." The old man appeared somewhat dissatisfied with the village elder's methods and rubbed a square groove at the side of the stone disc with a wry expression. Han Li silently smiled in response. He reckoned that the old man had told him that last part in order to involve him in a power struggle within the village. However, Han Li didn't have the slightest interest in becoming tangled up in the matter. It appeared that the old man in front of him had started behaving like a mortal after he was severed from the path of cultivation, and had involved himself in a contest for political power. Han Li sighed and felt that this was quite lamentable. A trace of disappointment appeared in the old man's eyes when he saw Han Li remain silent. But soon, his expression recovered and he began to idly chat. The old man casually mentioned, "It is unknown just how many years this forsaken land has existed. Although very few cultivators are sucked in, I reckon that over time several hundred cultivators have met their end here in the Umbra realm. I've heard that core formation cultivators and even nascent soul cultivators have lived out their days in this land." Han Li's expression stirred. "There have been nascent soul cultivators here." The old man sighed. "That's right. Although I don't know how many years ago it was when that expert had been sucked into this land, but he had once been an elder of this village. I guess that he was the same as you too, and was sucked into the ghost mist when there was an eruption of spirit-extinguishing chi. Normally, the strange fog would be incapable of capturing such a figure." "That should be the case." However, the spirit-extinguishing chi is quite fearsome. I'd guess that only the deity transformation stage cultivators from legend would be able to resist it. Deity transformation stage. Fellow Daoist scope of thought is truly wide. With regards to the nascent soul cultivator, although he already died trapped in this place, he left behind a few records, some of which detail his cultivation experiences. While these items might be incredibly precious on the outside, but here, the old man shook his head with a sense of regret. Han Li animatedly said, his cultivation experiences. I am very interested. Would fellow Daoist happen to know where they are? Records of a nascent soul cultivator's experiences are extremely valuable. It was only natural for Han Li to want to take a look. The old man rubbed the wrinkles on his face and casually said, I was excited like you when I first heard of this. However, after staying in this place for so long, I've completely lose interest in them. Without any magic power, the records are nothing more than drawings. If you're still interested in taking a look, all of the cultivator's remaining possessions are being kept in storage. The old man then pointed to a shabby stone building in a corner of the village. Barely restraining his excitement, Han Li calmly said a few words of thanks to the old man. Han Li chatted a bit more with the old man, but he was able to see Han Li's impatience and took the initiative to take his leave. Han Li watched the old man's departing figure and pursed his lips. After a quick moment of deliberation, he shook his head and descended from the stone platform. He then quickly walked towards the storage room with the cultivator's remaining belongings. Many villagers along the way felt that Han Li's face was somewhat unfamiliar and curiously glanced at him. However, none of them bothered to approach or question him. As a result, Han Li was able to arrive in front of a rather worn black stone building unobstructed. After a moment of hesitation, he pushed the door in front of him, but it didn't budge in the slightest. Han Li was surprised by the door's resistance and suspected that there was something wrong with the door. But after taking another deep breath, he used the entirety of his strength. Although he hadn't cultivated any exterior martial arts, his body had passed through the essence cleansing of both foundation establishment and core formation and was able to muster great force. With a heavy groan, the door slowly began to give way, inch by inch, and Han Li was elated at the sight. At that moment, he discovered that for some reason, the door was twice as thick as an ordinary door. It was no wonder the door was nearly stuck. Han Li quickly entered the room and was faced with a moist stench of decay. He grimaced and quickly held his breath until the outside air rushed into the room and cleared out most of the unpleasant scent. He then took a short breath of fresh air before he began to look through the room, using the faint light from the doorway. The room was rather simple. Apart from the rows of stone tablets that took up a majority of the room, there were also a few stone tables. The stone tablets were about 3 meters tall and 6 meters wide, much to Han Li's surprise. As for the stone tables, they had records and a few scrolls as well as what seemed to be lifeless magic tools. Han Li quickly recovered from his surprise, and after some thought, he burst into laughter. How could one find wood or bamboo to make paper with in this realm? As for jade slips, they were incapable of being used without magic power. As such, the stone tablets would be the only way to record something, so these stone tablets should be the records they had left behind. As for the magic tools on the table, they seemed to be just like his own flying swords and must be removed from this place before they could be put away. As for storage pouches, Han Li hadn't spotted any of them in the room. It seems they had been dealt with in a different manner and weren't left on display. After glancing at the general situation in the room, Han Li casually walked over to a stone tablet and saw that it was covered in a thick layer of dust, obscuring whatever was carved into it. Han Li casually tore off a piece of his jacket with a frown and started to wipe it clean. Soon, Han Li was able to see what was carved onto the tablet. These weren't characters that were widely used in the cultivation world, but rather were a type of rarely seen script. Fortunately for Han Li, he was vastly experienced and could easily recognize them. But as soon as Han Li glanced at the tablet, his interest immediately disappeared. This was merely the diary of a foundation establishment cultivator. Han Li immediately set it to the side and began to look through the other stone tablets in the room. There were about 20 in total. It was only when Han Li reached the 6th stone tablet that his interest finally began to stir. He had found what he was looking for, the cultivation experiences of the nascent soul cultivator. Han Li was entranced and motionlessly stood in front of the stone tablet for an unknown amount of time before letting out a long breath and revealing a complicated expression. Han Li muttered, "So it turns out that condensing a nascent soul is such a fearsome affair. Even with the assistance of the 9-curl spirit ginseng, my odds of condensing a nascent soul still aren't very high. It seems that being dropped into the Umbra realm was somewhat beneficial after all." Although the tablet didn't describe any specific method of cultivation, the nameless nascent soul cultivator had recorded his experiences from the foundation establishment stage to when he had condensed a nascent soul with impeccable detail. Han Li felt delighted surprise upon reading through them. With the pointers given through the nascent soul cultivator's experiences, Han Li would make far less mistakes due to misconceptions when condensing a nascent soul. After reading through the stone tablet several times to make sure that he hadn't overlooked anything, Han Li put it to the side and began to look through the remaining tablets. He had originally intended to depart, but after some thought, he figured that since he was already there he may as well read through them all and learn what he could. As such, Han Li looked through each of the tablets in a lax manner. As expected, the remaining tablets didn't contain anything truly useful. Although a few of them contained cultivation arts, they were all beneath his notice as he had the profound yin arts in his possession. After the time it took to finish a meal, Han Li arrived at the final tablet. He absent-mindedly swept the dust off of the tablet and examined it before revealing an astonished expression. This tablet was completely different from the rest. It was filled with finely carved, rice-sized characters that were far smaller than anything on the previous tablets. Furthermore, when Han Li swept his gaze over them, he discovered that there were 2 different types of characters written on the tablet. One was a common ancient language, but the other was in demon beast script. Han Li's curiosity was greatly piqued, and he began to carefully look through it while becoming increasingly more excited. The stone tablet was a manual specifically intended to teach the demon language. Furthermore, it was extremely detailed and gave word-by-word explanations. The cultivator who carved this had an immense familiarity with the demon beast language. Although Han Li couldn't immediately grasp the teachings, if he recorded the text and slowly read through it day by day, he was certain to be able to learn it. As such, he would be able to clearly understand the demon techniques that were recorded in the old hidebook and the copper demon plate. As for whether or not humans could learn the techniques of demons, Han Li didn't bother thinking much about it. Even if the demon techniques were of no use to him, there were only benefits to be gained from learning the demon language. Who knew whether or not it would be useful in the future? After all, this was an incredibly rare opportunity. After spending a rather long period of time, Han Li managed to utilize his eidetic memory and commit every character on the tablet to memory without fail. He then took a deep breath and left the room without even bothering to take another look at the magic tools on the tables. After leaving the stone building, Han Li began to wander around the village and examined a few of the more peculiar buildings. He would examine them closely and talk to a few of the nearby villagers about them. Fortunately for him, these villagers were rather simple-minded. Although he as a complete stranger, they amiably answered any questions he had. With this, Han Li quickly began to understand a few basic things about the Umbra realm. For example, since there were no iron mines or such, they could only refine weapons from the bones of particular Umbra beasts. Of course, weapons couldn't directly be made from the bones themselves and were immersed in a liquid known as dark water, hardening the weapons as a result. Additionally, they gained the added effect of yin flames, causing them to become particularly powerful against Umbra beasts. But because the supplementary effect of the yin flames quickly expired, these weapons had to be re-immersed in dark water every so often in order to maintain their deadliness. This greatly aroused Han Li's curiosity. Furthermore, every few months, there would be a storm of yin winds that lasted several days. During this time, a majority of the Umbra realm would be covered in bone-chilling black yin winds. Humans are incapable of moving outside during this period, as they would be turned into black ice sculptures by the yin winds. Only with the protection of the village's spell techniques could the villagers remain unharmed. In contrast, Umbra beasts were most active during the storm and would frequently appear, sometimes attacking the villages in groups, much to the worry of humans. Han Li had acquired quite a lot of information in this manner before suddenly being inspired to ask about the slender-eyed white-faced man that seemed to bode him ill. They told him that he was an outsider surnamed Feng who had been sucked in several years ago that possessed astonishing martial arts. He had killed powerful Umbra beasts many times since arriving and was rather renowned in the village. As a result, he had become an elder despite his young age and was responsible for teaching the youths in the village martial arts, gaining great prestige amongst the village youth as well. While Han Li didn't feel particularly fearful after hearing this, he inwardly frowned and felt that the man would prove quite troublesome. After strolling around the village for a while longer and seeing what there was to see, he leisurely made his way back to his building. But just as he arrived, Han Li suddenly heard a man's voice coming from within the room. "What? Everything I just said was sincere. So long as Lady Mai marries me, not only will you have no lack of food, but you need not risk your life to carry out missions. I have remained alone for many years, not because I am a fickle person, but because Lady Mai is the first that truly touches my heart." At some unknown time, the middle-aged man surnamed Feng had arrived within the room.